Welcome everybody to Beyond Sales, transforming intent data into revenue generating marketing strategies. We'll get into who we are here in just a sec, but a couple quick housekeeping items before we get started. Number one, you can submit questions into the Q&A tab or into the chat throughout this. And Mike and we've got a Q&A session at the end if they come up. We also very well may address them just as we're going through this, but I know we're super excited about it. We will also be recording this and sharing it afterwards. So I know taking massive notes and screenshots and things like that can distract, and you can be fully present as you go through that. We'll make sure that this gets out to you afterwards. But with that, I am very excited to dive in and get started. So my name is Jeff Marcoux. I am the CMO of Bombora. I have been a multiple time previous customer of Bombora, both in the enterprise space as well as in the hypergrowth startup space. And I've also helped to implement this at very small companies as well in that. And what I'm really excited about this is what Mike's going to help unveil today a little bit here, is the many ways in which we can start to think about intent data and how it can impact our business with that. But I want to hand it over to Mike as one of the co-founders of Bombora, but introduce yourself and share this really cool new framework we've got today.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff. I'm excited to be on with everybody today. Thanks for joining. Like Jeff said, I'm a co-founder at Bombora, and I spend most of the time on the go-to-market side of our business, talking with our big direct customers, working with our channel partners, just immersing myself in the customer experience as much as possible. And that's kind of a good segue into what we want to talk about today. When we first launched Bombora, a lot of our job as part of the early group that helped create the intent data category was to kind of evangelize around everything you could do with intent data, right? Kind of this world of there was no end to the possibilities in terms of all of the different things you can do with it. And that was really exciting for a long time. And as most of you know, now intent data has become kind of this hallmark of the B2B go-to-market. But what we realized along the way is no end to the possibilities is actually a difficult challenge from a customer experience perspective, right? It's hard to say, here's all of your data, here are the different topics or signals that you should care about, and good luck, because you could do a million different things. So what we've rolled out over the last few months and spent a lot of time before that working on is what we call our application framework. And I think we might have it on the next slide. Yeah, so we have, what seems like a really simple list of use cases actually took us a long time to start to think about all of the different things that our customers are doing with the data and how to put them in kind of these digestible buckets, and then start to build a muscle around implementing these use cases kind of on a one by one basis. Before, we were kind of in this world of onboarding where we said, okay, here's all the data we think you need based on your business. Where do you need that data to live? Okay, here we go. We'll get the data flowing. And then let's just kind of talk about all the different things you could do. So the idea here is to move into kind of the customer experience around intent data 2.0, where we can one by one systematically help customers implement use cases as opposed to onboard them with data. And so I think we'll have a series of these webinars and other content opportunities that'll be anchored around this framework. Today, we're going to focus on the middle section, marketing. As a lot of the sales use case on the right-hand side, often can create a lot of organizational momentum. It's close to revenue. But what we find is that it's actually the marketing organization that's purchasing the data. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruit and a lot of kind of quick wins within these marketing use cases that we'll focus on today. And then in another webinar, another day, we'll talk about the far left, which is go-to-market planning and measurement. As the data becomes visualized and easier to see over time, whether that's through your own visualization tools or the Bombora visualization tools, all of these strategic use cases start to get unlocked. Things like market intelligence, content strategy, looking at the momentum that your brand has across the B2B internet, things like that. So we're excited to dive into those as well. But like I said, today we'll focus on these marketing use cases, and hopefully you guys will exit with some, tactical, pragmatic things that we can help you stand up.
Yeah, one of the things I really love about this, I know I've personally done every one of these, and even some that didn't make our cut there as we were going through, the most popular ones across that. And what's really powerful about these is how they all start to tick and tie together, and how it really creates a roadmap for driving adoption of intent data across your entire organization, not just in, smarter advertising, or hey, this is the list of people to call, but really starting to drive transformation. I know at our intent event a couple weeks ago, we had a lot of customers dive into these different areas, and how they started stitching these different sections together. So while we're going to go deep on marketing today, it really is about creating that roadmap for the organization, and rolling these out over time. So, key things that we're going to hit on here today as we go through this, we're going to talk about this power of centralized media buying, and how you can truly get to a next level of optimizing your advertising spend. We're going to dive a little bit into around the power of this data for chatbot and website personalization, and driving some of that content strategy that you've got. We'll look at the focus on demand gen and what that really means. It's not just all digital, right? But also the physical ways in which you can think about deploying intent data to be smarter with your events as well. And lastly, we're going to focus on like the high quality site analytics that we've got here, and how you can use that to not only do your proactive demand gen into the market, but also your reactive as people are hitting your sites, and getting a lot more intelligent, not wasting your money on irrelevant site visitors and things like that. So I want to hand it to Mike because I know he's super excited about this first one here.
Yeah, and so on the face of it, this use case is simple, right? It's we're all have some form of a media budget, that stretches across advertising and paid social in particular, and to direct those dollars towards companies that are much more likely to engage with you based on intent data. That's an early use case. That's not one that folks need to be educated on in terms of just from a conceptual level. We do see kind of these two different chunks of how customers are buying media today, and this might be useful context for folks. One is through typically media agencies that are accessing DSPs directly. So we think of this as kind of this industrial strength where larger media budgets are taking advantage of that buying power. They're buying media at scale through services teams that have a lot of buying power. And typically those media budgets are centralized. Not always, but typically those are more likely to be centralized, so that all of this kind of like data strategies that we're building within our organizations can then be applied to one kind of execution point. And we think this is really powerful, especially for larger customers who are building these great data recipes internally. A lot of times these data recipes are feeding sales. And then to have this one kind of industrial strength media execution point, you can take that same strategy and marry it together kind of in one foul swoop. So that's one way that the market is approaching, media at scale. The other is through platforms, right? Like we've listed a few of them here, and these are a lot of our best partners. The kind of opportunity here is when you're accessing these ABM platforms to take that same approach and make sure that you don't have these kind of like siloed business units or regions kind of doing more random acts of advertising. Right. We, as much as possible from a best practices perspective, we see our customers building this data strategy that's holistically serving the entire business, and then applying that into their media, paid social, et cetera. So sometimes the platform, which can give an individual region or business unit quick access to execution, sometimes can kind of skip that step. And so it's kind of like pros tip here is like, let's make sure, at least in terms of our best customers, having this centralized data strategy that can feed through any execution platform, not one that happens to be centralized from a media buying perspective. So Jeff, anything you would add there?
No, I think one big piece on this is the intent data can be deployed on really any of these. And I don't know if any of you are starting to do kind of CTV and all that kind of fun stuff too, but really being able to put that media in place in front of the specific devices. And this is one interesting thing, we'll get to it when we get to the website analytics, but the device that's actually showing the interest in whatever your product is also. So not just even, those that are, these are the accounts showing interest, but these specific, people, while we don't connect the contact for privacy reasons and that, but we can sure as heck advertise to them. And so that's a really powerful connection that we're able to make at scale, to your point there. But that industrial strength isn't right for everybody. That we've got amazing partners like Rollwork, Six Sense, and Terminus, who sometimes that's the right play, right? You may not have, the budgets, or you may want to keep that in house. And frankly, even when I was at some of the mega enterprises, while we had a big centralized media team, we also kind of had some of these ABM orchestration plays that would help us execute smaller, micro campaigns. So it varies a little bit to each, but if you're not using it across either with a, an agency or a SAP direct, as you said, or one of these orchestration platforms, definitely an area to take a look at, because it'll bring a next level of intelligence and ROI to it.
For sure. Another one on this use case to think about is, where some folks struggle is this idea that, okay, we'll use round numbers here. Let's say we have 1,000 accounts that we want to target for a particular product, but maybe only 100 of them are showing enough intent right now to warrant kind of a more down funnel message where we're trying to create demand. We see our kind of like best in breed customers starting to switch to this world of like, okay, my intent campaigns are always on. They're small, but they're always on, and I don't need to plan them, right? We might check in on them on a quarterly basis to see if the content trends have changed and maybe inform how those will perform best. But from a kind of budget allocation perspective, they're just kind of always on. And then we can put our brain power around this kind of like more awareness driven, but measured around what is driving companies down into that intent category. Right? Are we creating more intent? Are we creating more demand by these broader campaigns that we're running versus, trying to spend, sometimes larger media budgets just against these accounts that might be ready for sales right now. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. Again, feel free to drop your questions in chat or chat right at us as we go through it here. But we know that, right, we spend a lot of money on media. Improving its effectiveness is important. As a big part there. Ed, yes, we will be sharing this out afterwards here on that. So the next one, obviously probably one of the most popular ones, why people, where we almost started out, right, is in this world of demand gen, right? Finding companies who are the right fit, that are showing that high intent, right? That intent is increasing, right? It's recent, and it's engaging, right? If you've ever heard me talk before, you've probably heard me talk about the FIRE methodology, right? Fit, intent, recency, and engagement. That's what we want to do. And one of the cool things that we can do in this use case is really start to think broader than digital. Digital's a part of our overall demand gen strategy as we approach it, but we also want to think about things like, hey, where are we syndicating content to and targeting that out? Where are we list buys, right? A dirty word kind of in the marketing realm, but what's funny is I at times I've described this as almost the modern list buy. Hey, I know I get all the emails all the time. Hey, do you want a list of customers of this company or of these titles? It's like, well, everybody's going to get that. And that's not tailored to my business in any way, shape, or form. Yet, obviously, those companies are still selling and making a good amount of money. Otherwise, they wouldn't be, continuing those efforts. And we can use, right, Bombora's data to dig in and say, hey, here are the firmographics, and you can upload your own target account list. And then out of that, which ones are actively showing that intent? And then ultimately, which ones are engaging with my brand as we go across that. Outbound prospecting, as you go through that, where and how do I spend my time with my team? We'll go into a couple examples of these on each one. Direct mail, where potentially is this person in the US using down to the metro area doing this research for this company and being able to prioritize who's going to get what when. And we've got a couple plays we're going to walk you through here specific to this demand gen one. And then I do want to spend a little bit of time on events and we get to the end of this one, because that's actually a huge area of opportunity for both massive flagpole events. Like we have a major tech customer who uses this to say, hey, here are my target accounts. Which things do they care about right now? And the answer was the majority of your target accounts that you want to attend this event is around sustainability. And so talking about sustainability in tech, sustainability in business approach, et cetera, as they went through that. So I actually used this to tailor the content of what they were going to put forward. We actually used this to see what our target account was interested in. And we saw that marketing was the top of mind out of our 3 different areas. That's why we're doing this one first as you go through that. So being able to use the active intent of your target market to tailor your content, super powerful. We were just at the Forrester B2B Summit just last week. And one of the things our team did around it with the event data was before we got the list of who's attending, we looked at last year's show list, and we looked at across those companies that attended previously, who were in our ICP, who's actively showing research in our area, right? For Bombora and for some of our partners and specifically around intent data, et cetera. And we started an SDR and advertising outreach to those companies and secured a bunch of meetings before we even showed up. And then once we got the list of accounts that were there, and this varies a little company to company, but something I've had the fortune of doing is, hey, you get that app, right? It has everybody logged into it. You can actually dive in and say, hey, on that app, I can quickly go through and see, are any of the companies in my ICP attending this show, actively showing intent, and I can reach out through the app, right, to try to get a meeting. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff with around post-show follow-up. The other fun one that is really, really powerful is we're all doing first-party events again. One thing that's really stood out is while you have to convince people to choose to put on their hard pants and leave their home office, right, or things like that, you got to have a compelling value proposition with it. One of our biggest struggles in the field is, where should I host this, right? You've always got, oh, we think they're in these cities, et cetera. But with Bombora's data, I can actually look down to the geo and metro areas of, in my ICP, where in the country is the majority of this intent happening? And then I can use that to start to tailor and back into what cities we're going to do our activities in. So, for example, we recently did this across both our audience solutions business and the data side there, and our company search side of the business, where we said, what are the cities with the most overlap of active interest in these? And so we overlaid that, and we saw that the top cities were in San Francisco and in New York. And so we planned a couple different activities there. We're gearing up to do that again in Q3, where we're letting the data really lead us. And as I mentioned, kind of help us pick what the conversation might be about. Before I get into some examples of kind of all the demand gen stuff, Mike, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just from a high level, keeping in mind that these marketing use cases, one of the big benefits is that they're kind of self-contained from a functional area perspective. Like, we don't need to evangelize across the aisle that this is something that you should act on, right? We can kind of like build around it from a marketing perspective and inside of the marketing silo in a good way. So that's something to keep in mind. Ultimately, I think we all know that getting a live sales use case that's generating revenue, giving you meetings you wouldn't have had otherwise and revenue you wouldn't have had otherwise, is the ultimate kind of lubricant to get intent data holistic adoption flowing at your organization. Nothing beats it. Nothing beats finding a deal. But these marketing use cases, once that kind of sales use case is in place, like having them work together is what supercharges it and keeps it going over time.
Yeah, no, definitely on that one, getting to some of those quick wins. So in this example, this is an example of what we call our total addressable in market dashboard, where, and I'll use Bombora just as our example here today. So in the last 90 days, there have been about 3,300 enterprise businesses actively researching Bombora with varying kind of signal strengths as we go across this. So, I can see that there's, about 5% are massive, right? They're super in-depth, high scores, et cetera, along those lines. Well, being able from a demand gen perspective to dig in and say, hey, these ones I want to hit with kind of early top of funnel content, right? Maybe some brand messaging, some positioning. These ones I want to be hitting with middle of funnel, like our great placement as a leader in the Forrester Wave, right? That kind of content, customer case studies as you go through that. And these ones, if I'm not already in conversations with them, I might be a little late to the game, right? As you go through that. And so I'm actually able to start to tailor my marketing strategies from a demand gen perspective based off of where people are in their research journey. But even having access to this to say, all right, these are the ones, and here's the breakdown of our current, right? Yes, there's your total addressable market, but then there's that total addressable in market, and having that kind of view. Because right then there's a massive layer up top here that's not actively researching it. And so that's, again, really powerful as we take a look at that. But then out of those, right, I need to understand what my target accounts are even in market for. So I know what message to put in front of them. Maybe you're fortunate to have one product, right? So if they're researching you, if they're researching your topic, right, your solution area, that's super easy. You know what you're going to talk to them about. But a lot of companies have multiple products. Some have dozens, right, as you go through that. So which one's first? What do we talk about? And so being able to answer that and then segment, right, both for my digital campaigns, my outbound campaigns, all of that, being able to tie that through and through, that's where it gets really, really powerful. It's like, use this example here. Say this is an HR software company, right, that has 3 different solutions as they go through here. So I'm able to start to dig in and be like, oh, hey, for Dell and DCP, I'm going to focus on them with, an employee experience campaign and message, followed by, an applicant tracking one as I go through that. And so I can really start to tailor it. This, again, as we mentioned on the first part of the call, this actually does dovetail right into sales prioritization a little bit too, and key account intelligence, which we'll hit on in another one. But this informs your campaigns, but the same information is incredibly powerful for your sales teams. And so now I can start to say, okay, these accounts here that are 30% or higher, I'm going to put into the applicant tracking campaign. These ones I'm going to put into this campaign. And I'm able to really start to dial that in as I go through that. Another example from a demand gen perspective is 58% of the companies that are researching intent data actually have visited Bombora in the last 90 days. Hey, pat on the back, right? That's great. I'm getting 60% coverage as we're going through that. Now what I want to do is I can take that delta, right? That other 42% that haven't been to the website, I can target them again with a different message. I can try something else. I can try another strategy because I want to get them to engage. And then based on what they interacted with on the website, I might change my tactics going through that. So again, being able to overlay this in those different ways and look at it is incredibly powerful, because now I know what they're interested in. I know, hey, have they even made it to my site? What's the delta of accounts that are actively doing research that don't even maybe know we exist yet? So I'm going to approach it in different ways. This is an example play of a customer of ours. This is actually Hillary at Snowflake. This is one of their key plays that they run. And so they start to really focus on this concept of predictable pipeline, where they're digging in and saying, hey, we're seeing a suggested list that is saying these are the accounts doing research. Then they'll pick that topic, right? Here's the solution that I want to market them to. And then they kick off their ABM campaign, right? The advertising component of that. After 2 weeks, they then start their SDRs reaching out to those same people as they're going through that. And then once they get to the end of the quarter, they have a different kind of wake the dead strategy here as they go through it, right? Those who haven't engaged and how they want to retarget them. But it's all driven off of, yes, they're actively doing research. This is the solution area that they're interested in. Let's go try to wake them up. And it's that tag team between that SDR team and their ABM team that really creates the magic there. One other example play on this one, this is one I've run personally several times, is, hey, yeah, they're high fit and they're showing intent. So I'm going to warm them up for about a month, right? It depends on your sales cycle, things like this. So I use this at a 12 to 18 month sales cycle company that I was at. And so, we're looking at, hey, the spiking topics based on the personas that we engage with around our demand unit, tailoring the ads to them based on what they're showing solution on, but basically warm them up for 30 days. If they didn't engage with us at any time throughout that 30 days, then we would do a direct mail motion, right? Increase the cost of my tactics as I go along. If they engaged, we'd kick them right to the SDR team right away there. Once we got our meeting booked, we did, joint, because these deals were big. and it took so long, we would do joint together marketing, our brand plus their brand, and really trying to focus on engaging in and around that. Then we'd cut right our spend, et cetera, along those lines. And once we got them in place, which again, this goes to the sales use cases, we would monitor them if we lost the deal for resurgence of activity or interest, or we'd be looking for some expansion opportunities in that. So the demand gen bucket, and we'll do a whole deep dive here on just the event one specifically, because we get a lot of interest in that and there's a lot of real impact around that. But hopefully it's kind of started to show you the picture of kind of how intent data can flow into really informing not just, hey, these are the accounts I'm going to put into an ad campaign, but what message, where are they potentially in the US? One thing we didn't talk about, we had Siemens sharing how what they actually will do is they'll see an account starting to show interest in doing research, and they'll take that account and they'll look at where's the research happening, and then they'll actually reflect that in their LinkedIn ad campaign. Very simple play, but massively impactful. They they said, their head of ABM said, we can skip the funnel sometimes as we go through that motion there, because we're hitting the person doing the research right at the right times again there. So adding this layer of intelligence can really take it to the next level. Continuing on, so site personalization. This can be scary, right? If you've ever gone down this road, you know that it can turn into this giant Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole of, oh my gosh, I need so many permutations of so much content, etc. And it can get pretty overwhelming. But there's some basics that you can do and simplify it down. So a couple of those are, really saying like, hey, just based on the website, right, we can do some very basic things. We can change the imagery out, right, by an industry. We can lead with a different frontline message or call to action as you go through that. And so maybe, for website visitors who I can de-anonymize and I see, hey, it's from target company executive in healthcare actively showing intent, I'm going to show them content that's tailored to that. Or a very easy way to do this is taking that same data set and tailoring your chatbot to engage with this. So like we have a partner, Qualified, and that's what we use on our site. And we've deployed this where, hey, are they actively showing interest? Hey, they're from these different industries. And that experience that the chatbot offers changes based on the information that we know about those different accounts. But then, right, I might get people that it's a non-target company. Maybe they're not in an area we're interested in low intent. So we're going to show them kind of some generic manufacturing content as we go through there, or maybe they'll get just the basic unedited website. So taking that information, but what information is there at your fingertips? So this is just one example on this. Is like I'm actually able to see which accounts are hitting my site. So hey, maybe these two are actively. We're getting a ton of unique visitors, lots of good high engagement on different pages as we're going through that. And so I'm going to choose, how I'm going to follow up with these, what content I want to tailor that to. So yeah, sure. Identifying the companies on your website, super powerful. A lot of people do it. But when you start to dig deeper, what I also can start to see is things like, hey, out of those on my website, like what we were saying earlier with the Bombora data, these are domains without intent, and the majority of the people who are getting to our website are actually researching us in something that we care about. That's cool. That's definitely helpful. It helps inform that tactic. But then I can dive and take that same research out of, hey, here was, everybody that's total addressable in market, but I now want to look at that from the lens of those on my website. Where are they in their journey? So that I can start to tailor, again, that website experience based off of all of this different information there. So again, I can take this and feed this into CDP platforms, into many different ways, or you can simplify it and execute through just with your chatbot as you go through that. And the last one I'll highlight here is being able to really start to take that action, right? So now I can see these accounts are on my site. This is how many people we've got on there. They're, what's their funnel stage? And then what are they most interested in? And so this feeds into some of the ad stuff that Mike will get into here in a sec, around it, right, from a retargeting perspective. But then also this feeds into my campaign strategy across the board. I know I can keep hammering this, keep trying to get multi-threaded as we go throughout the whole process here. So really cool, really powerful stuff, bringing that all to bear. on-site personalization. Mike, anything you'd add there?
No, I think you hit it well. This is an area, I think if they go back to the application framework, like this, using intent data to personalize in real time is kind of toward the bleeding edge. There's not a ton of customers that have gotten to this yet. Everyone's doing some form of personalization. Everyone's certainly looking at the data coming off of their website and letting that inform from a measurement perspective. But we think personalization and some of these advanced use cases Jeff is talking through here is kind of like the next wave of innovation.
Yeah, definitely. And there's simple ways to start. You don't have to do everything all at once. So if that's an area of interest, don't hesitate to reach out, because we've got customers kind of doing both ends of the spectrum there. So Mike, I'll hand to you on this one because I kind of alluded to it, but yeah, this one's really cool.
Yeah, and just to make sure, I know we had a question from Alex in the chat. I think great question on measurement. And actually, after we get through this use case, Jeff, it'd be a good kind of like capper to the entire discussion as we'll think through
for sure
how this stuff gets measured holistically. So thanks for the question. And yeah, so let's say now we're doing a good job of in real time capturing a lot of information on who's coming to our site. Right. So in Bombora's world, these are attributes like, of course, the domain, what company they work for. But unique to Bombora is, what is that particular company interested in? Do they have intent in what products? What is that particular user interested in based on their activity across the Bombora co-op? So now we think through like, okay, what do we do with this information? Jeff talked about real-time personalization. Great. The other thing that's starting to gain steam is the idea of like, okay, let's take all of those attributes on those unknown users and append them to some system, typically a CDP or a DMP, that can enrich all of the information that you're storing on your anonymous users. Right. So typically, if you have a CDP or a DMP, you have all of your anonymous users stored in that system. You might know just what pages they visited. You might know if they're known to you from the past. If you've already captured them as a lead in the past, you might have more information about them. But for the most part, you don't know a lot about them. So you can use this data, enrich that first party data. And once you've done that, you have a data mart that's full of all of these rich attributes all of a sudden. And it really unlocks these kind of two core use cases: enhanced retargeting and search targeting. So enhanced retargeting is probably self-explanatory. You might already be doing retargeting or targeting these first-party users. Now you just have a lot more information to do it. Functional area, if they're in market, what topics they're most interested in, their seniority, right? All of these things become these targeting attributes, where instead of running a broad retargeting campaign, you can be running all kinds of different interesting plays based on this new rich information that's appended into your first-party data. So hopefully that one's self-explanatory, but happy to go deeper. And then really interesting one is search, right? So the most common use case here would be, let's say you have, we'll keep it simple. We have one product that we're interested in, and we have 1,000 companies that are showing a lot of intent on that one product. Those 1,000 companies are represented by users in your data mart. Right? So if we can bundle together all of the users that we've tagged as representative of those 1,000 companies, this becomes a first party audience, because now we've augmented your first party data that can be sent to Google. So now we can create a campaign around that small audience. And if a user from that audience performs a search on Google for your product, you can't lose that traffic. You have to win that traffic, right? They're in market. They've already been to your site. Now they're performing a search. You don't want your competitor to win that bid. So you can have this small, right? It'll be a small audience, but you can, really push the limits of what you're willing to pay for that traffic, because you want it to come to your site, not your competitor's site. So those are kind of the core use cases that kind of become unlocked once you've got this data all augmented and enriching of your first party data. And that's kind of above and beyond what Jeff was talking about, which is actually using it in real time. Mm-hmm. And Jeff, anything I missed there?
No, I mean, this is just a couple example activations of this. One's in treasury data on the left. It's a brand oriented use case, and the other's Google Audience Manager. And so we have customers actively building and architecting around these right now to take that retargeting to that next level, to take search to that next level from their strategy there. Yeah, so I think we'll take questions here in just a sec along those lines. Hopefully we kind of whet your appetite a little bit today on some of those core marketing applications of intent data as we are going through that here. We talked about centralizing the media buying perspective of that. We talked about somehow you can start to personalize that website and chatbot content. Again, that has to partner in with a partner technology, right? Your CMS system, your CDP, your chatbot, but making those all more intelligent is really powerful and impactful. That efficiency across demand gen, again, we covered a lot there in a relatively short period of time. So I'm happy to go deeper with anyone on those because we knew we had a lot to cover. And then really kind of some of that enhanced higher quality, site analytics, because enabling those activations there. But now I'm definitely happy to take some questions. I know I've seen a couple come in here as we go through that. One thing, if you haven't checked this out yet, we've got this killer marketing pulse report. It looks at what are the trends going on by marketers, what are they researching, what are they thinking about, different size companies, what's top of mind for them. Check it out. We're publishing these quarterly now just to see, because we can actually see, hey, this is what the baseline's been, and now this is where we're seeing those biggest shifts. And we just dropped a link to it here in the chat as well. But with that, let's dive into the questions here. Now, Alex, we'll start with yours because you've been waiting so patiently on that. So, measuring the impact of brand activations on demand gen programs. Typical measurement play. Are marketers in this space typically looking at total conversion uplift, or are there more sophisticated ways, sophisticated approaches in place? So, yeah, I was born and raised as a demand gen product marketing person who has always kind of been like brands a little fluff and stuff, but now we can actually start to measure it, right? And you can start to really segment it. So one of the things we do regularly with our customers is we actually conduct what we call a historical buyer's journey analysis. And what we're able to start to see is here are the different research peaks as they happen across the buying journey. So question number one in any brand campaign is, right, there are those that are researching me and at different levels. And then there's the rest of my TAM that's not researching me. And so how do I think about that? Maybe that's where I want to flight my brand campaign to those versus, right, the top of funnel component. So how do you measure the impact of that as you go through it? So there's a couple different ways along those lines. And Mike, feel free to add in here as we go. But number one is, on average, every week, there's X number of companies that go from not showing any level of intent to showing intent around the stuff that you care about. That's one big way, is if you're flighting a brand campaign, be it around your specific brand or your solution area, you can actually start to measure that. I can see, hey, based on this campaign that we're running, are we seeing a lift in just the sheer volume of accounts going from not showing any intent to showing intent on an average week? We actually have a lot of customers who do that, where they're like, I ran an ABM campaign here, and I saw a specific website. I saw research increase on our solutions and website traffic from these companies happen at the same time there. So that's one way I would take a look at it. Another way that I would look at it that's really interesting is that the way that our company Surge solution works is one of the only holistic ways to really measure brand, right? And look at you versus your competitors, because it's about creating research with your target audience. So, I'll give an example. Hey, we put in a bunch of airport billboards. How do I measure that? I got foot traffic. Well, what I can actually look at is I can look at the metro area around the message of what that whatever my campaign was that I was running, the solution I was highlighting, did we see a lift in traffic happening there, right? In research happening from that particular region. Similarly, like with big third-party events and things like that. So there's some sophisticated ways to approach it as you go through that. But Mike, you probably have some additive ideas there too.
Yeah, I mean, we think about it from the bottoms up. So you create this great data recipe that works, right? And it might be companies that are surging around this particular set of topics. They've been to my website, they're a high fit, right? Whatever your data recipe is, ideally your activation of that data recipe at the confluence of sales and marketing A lot of times that could be SDR, BDR, a lot of the demand gen campaigns that Jeff was talking about. Ideally, those are measured with revenue and pipeline. Right. And so you're setting that baseline of what good looks like in terms of meetings, pipeline, revenue. And then you move up the funnel. And to Jeff's point, now you've got that stuff that I just described is always on. Then you've got this kind of thoughtful awareness, maybe branding driven campaigns. And we can start to measure those by how much of those signals are now being created that can be activated down funnel. Right. So did I create demand that is turning into these intent signals? Is that recipe staying full? Right. So am I making the same amount of material with that recipe? Or ideally, are my cool brand awareness campaigns creating more of that demand over time? So this is, it's probably a little bit forward looking, but it's exciting because we're all struggling with like how media math works and how we look at how we measure these big kind of fluffy brand campaigns. Well, what if there's a world where it's all coming from the bottoms up? We know this data recipe is generating revenue, and now we can ask ourselves, is this media activity feeding that recipe? Is it keeping it steady, or maybe even growing the amount of demand that we're acting on? And now sales and marketing are working off of the same measure. Which is exciting. It's really not where we are today, at least in terms of what we see. We still see easy to measure these sales use cases, great, but we're still trying to like evaluate the media use cases in their own silo, which is hard. So over time, they come together, organizations get more aligned.
Yeah. The other part I'd add in there too is it's brand campaigns are great, but what I really care about is brand campaigns in my target market, right? How do I know that I'm not wasting media dollars? How do I know I'm not wasting, physical placement somewhere? That's a big deal, right? And so being able to measure that against, right, your brand lift, the research in your brand, research about your solution with that specific target market is another big way to take a look at that. Got another question in here. As you think about orchestrating your advertising through a platform like a 6sense versus that buying data direct, which is better and why? Mike, you probably got the better perspective on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. Better is a tough, better or worse is tough. I think it's what serves your organization. Broad rules, like the bigger, more sophisticated, a lot of the more data sets that need to come together, the more unique those data sets to your own organization. Typically what we see is some centralized data service and data team that's distributing data out for these different use cases. Those tend to be, not always, but tend to be more the Bombora direct customer, where we can help those centralized data teams operationalize that activation framework kind of at full scale. Typically, if you don't have as much of your own unique data that needs to feed these recipes, if you have maybe a smaller team, less resources, the ABM platforms can be a kind of a faster way to get started. Some of the orchestration is kind of built in. So hopefully that's helpful, but those are kind of like the broad strokes that we see.
Awesome. I know we're at time. Maybe we'll take just one last one here real quick. There are a lot of great use cases that you highlighted. How do you recommend getting started? I'll take a crack at that one. So I usually like to find kind of what do we think is going to be most impactful for your organization, and then we kind of it's level of effort versus impact a little bit when we're starting in that, because as we said at the start, it's about creating that roadmap. You're not going to, if you do all these at once, you will fail, right? So it's how do we start it? How do we get those little wins right away and then make it very logical? Hey, if we start with demand gen, then the next thing is probably obviously some sales prioritization, right? And for demand gen, well, I want the content strategy that's kind of in the strategy and planning section. And so you can start with one or two, and then we start to expand out, and they naturally start to flow. Even as we were going through stuff today, right? It was like, oh, actually, that same view would be super helpful for key account intelligence as you're going through that. So it's best, you sit down and say, what are the 1 to 2 that we think would be most impactful? We look at the level of effort to get going on those. Because if it's going to be a massive lift, then we might want to start with something else and grow into that. But that was actually, it was funny that a lot of customers really did start small and focus on the things that were repeatable and that they could get those small wins in. And now it's across their whole organization as they go through that. But that's usually I recommend getting started. Mike, any additive thoughts there?
Yeah, just to the degree that that simple start does involve another functional area like sales, like if you're doing a demand gen program that requires sales follow-up, just make sure that you're building that strategy together. It sounds simple and maybe cheesy, but just make sure if sales is partnering with you, it's like, what do they think is important? What data do they think is going to be most impactful to how they do their outreach? And if you can build it together, the chances of success and kind of like to say the patient accepting the transplant, it goes up, tremendously, because it's not, one side of the aisle prescribing the strategy to another.
Yeah, that's great. If we didn't get to your questions, we'll follow up one-on-one for sure on that. But hopefully, this was kind of insightful. We'll be doing several of these. We'll go deep on the go-to-market strategy and planning, go deep on the sales use cases, and then we're actually going to start diving into these one by one, because there's a lot of interest going deep. Like events is a great example there, highly applicable to many and all of you trying to figure out how do we bring a little bit more intelligence to the way we approach it. So thanks for being on. Thanks for sticking around an extra couple minutes, and we'll see you all on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.